Ladies and gentlemen, it is officially November 1. To the rest of the world, that just means that it's Friday. But to an NRL nerd like me, that means that players who are off contract at the end of the 2025 season are now free to sign with other clubs for the 2026 season. Now, I realize the 2025 season hasn't even started yet, but these are contracts that we could see signed in the next few weeks. And let me tell you, there is some serious talent that has just hit the market. I'm going to take you through the best of those guys and try and figure out what clubs could use their talents the most, and how likely those players are to want to move elsewhere. So sit back, relax, and let's get into some transfer talk. I'm going to start off with Kotoni Staggs from the Broncos. The Broncos are facing a bit of a salary cap squeeze with the likes of Reece Walsh, Papenhuyzen, and Patrick Carrigan all commanding significant pay packets for the foreseeable future. The general media consensus was that with both Kotoni Staggs and Selwyn Cobbo off contract, the Broncos would only be able to keep one of those two. One thing that might change that though is this whole Ezra Mam situation. Mam's contract runs until the end of 2029, and he's on a reported $750,000 per season. If Mam does get sacked by the Broncos, then it might potentially free up the money for them to keep both Staggs and Cobbo. But then again, it doesn't look like the Broncos are going to do that, and they would have to recruit another 5/8 as well. If Staggs does want to return to New South Wales, there's a few clubs that would logically be interested in his services. The Bulldogs are likely to let go of big money outside back Josh Addo-Carr any day now. And Bronson Xerri comes off contract at the same time as Staggs. The Eels are another possible destination with their current best centre Will Penisini also off contract. More on him later. If they do end up losing Penisini to a stronger club, it could open up the door for Staggs to move back down south. And you could essentially copy and paste that for his teammate Selwyn Cobbo, although I do see it as less likely that the Queensland International departs Brisbane. At age 22, he's 4 years younger than Staggs, and I think incoming coach Michael Maguire would relish the opportunity to work with Cobbo. We saw 10 years ago what Maguire was able to do with the legendary fullback Greg Inglis. Cobbo has the same genetic gifts that Inglis had, so I do expect him to stay. Then again, one club that was chasing Cobbo earlier this year was the Sydney Roosters. And with Joseph Manu and Joseph Suoli'i having departed the club, and Daniel Tupou probably playing the last season of his career, Cobbo to the Roosters would make sense. Similarly to Maguire with Inglis, Robinson has worked wonders with Latrell Mitchell in the past, so you would expect Cobbo to back himself under either coach. The other option that's been spoken about is the Cowboys. They've obviously lost Valentine Holmes and don't have a big money halfback on the payroll. That's another one I could definitely see happening, with him linking up with Origin teammates Tom Dearden, Mario Taulagi, Ruben Cotter, and Jeremiah Nene. And speaking of those Cowboys, one that seems to have gone incredibly under the radar in terms of transfer talk is hooker Reece Robson. Robson will be 27 coming into the 2026 season, entering his prime as a dummy half. He's already got 5 Origin caps to his name and will likely attract some serious attention, particularly from clubs who feel that they can attract him back to Sydney. The Eels haven't really locked down the hooker position since Reid Marnie left the club. And incoming coach Jason Riles may be very tempted to try and pick up Robson using the money that they'll no longer be paying Clint Gutherson. But that's just one example. The Rabbitohs have now lost Damien Cook and placed all their faith into young hooker Peter Mamouzelos. He was very highly rated coming through the New South Wales Cup and came off the bench for the Rabbitohs for the majority of this season. But Robson is a completely other caliber of player at this stage in his career. And with Cody Walker also off contract, that might just free up the money for them to go after Robson. And on that note of Cody Walker, he will be 36 coming into the 2026 season. The thing with Cody though is that he made his first grade debut when he was aged only 26. He was still playing New South Wales Cup games up until then, so his body would have gone through some punishment, but nowhere near the punishment of first grade. That makes me think he could possibly play on in the NRL. If he does, I can't see it being anywhere but the Rabbitohs. Or potentially he seeks a move to the Super League. But it's worth discussing in this video because if he does move on, it's the kind of thing that could cause a domino effect across the league, influencing a lot of other signings. If Walker does retire, I'd expect it to free up Jack Whiten to play 5/8, meaning that South Sydney will be going after a high quality centre. I could see them pursuing Staggs in that instance, but equally Will Penisini, who has a player option for 2026, which means that he can choose to talk to other clubs now. Eels fans are going to hate me for saying this, but Penisini is a player that at some point in his career I can see being tempted to one of the league's biggest clubs. I know how much the Rabbitohs struggled this year, but I do still hold them in that regard. Aside from them though, the Panthers centers are both locked up long term. I'd expect the Storm wouldn't be able to afford a guy like Penisini in the outside backs with their all-star spine. But I would say the Roosters are a decent chance though. Penisini is best mates with Joseph Suaalii, who would speak very highly of his time in Bondi. And if you're making the claim that the Roosters are going to go after Kotoni Staggs or Selwyn Cobbo, then it makes sense that they'd consider Penisini as well. Staying on that Parramatta theme, Dylan Brown is off contract with one of the weirdest contract structures I have ever seen. Brown is free to talk to other clubs now, and yet he's got player options for every season between 2026 and 2031. Now, I've speculated a lot in this video, but this is one I'm actually quietly confident about. The New Zealand Warriors pursued Dylan Brown before his NRL debut back in 2019. They did eventually miss out on him because there was much more immediate opportunity to play first grade at Para. But then earlier this season, when Shaun Johnson announced his retirement, there were very strong rumours that the Warriors were pursuing Dylan Brown again. Current Warriors half Tamaire Martin is off contract at that same time, meaning the Warriors would potentially be able to offer Dylan Brown the halfback jersey that he's not going to get ahead of Mitch Moses at the Eels. Brown was born in Auckland and lived there until he was 15. It makes sense that he might be interested in returning there. And with there being a lack of high quality big money halves over at the Warriors, this is one that I could definitely see happening. Even if it's not for 2026, I think the player options every single season mean that the Warriors will always somewhat be in the race for him. One man I do reckon though will be very keen to stay at his current club is Raiders winger Xavier Savage. Savage hasn't had the most conventional first grade career so far. He was the Raiders' first choice fullback in 2022, playing 19 games. That was the year that the Green Machine made the finals. But then he sat in reserve grade for the entirety of 2023, playing only one NRL game that entire season. But 2024 was well and truly a return to form. He found a home on the wing, becoming the club's top try scorer for the season, beating the second placed Hudson Young by 5 tries. The Raiders did stick by him through that tumultuous period, and I imagine he'll want to repay the club by re-signing with them. Another man that I do expect to stay with his current club is Braydon Trindall, but he will have no shortage of suitors. Trindall's a rare commodity in that he is a good quality NRL halfback in his mid-20s, having stood up particularly in that finals game against the Cowboys. The club who've been spoken about as a likely destination for him is the Dragons. Obviously, Ben Hunt departed the club a matter of days ago, so they'll be looking for players to fill that halfback jersey. Carl Flanagan is the son of the coach and was very solid in 2024, but hasn't turned into the kind of quality halfback that you build a club around. He was originally signed to the club as a hooker/utility, so maybe he'll revert to that later in his career, particularly if Trindall does end up at the club. But I do think the Sharks are well on their way to becoming one of the strongest clubs in this competition. They've been really solid under coach Craig Fitzgibbon and seem to be going into 2025 with a mindset of Trindall as a halfback. Pending salary cap pressures, I do think Trindall's first preference would be to stay in the Shire, but it's definitely not outside the realms of possibility that he moves. And Trindall is very, very far from the only high-quality Shark that's currently free to talk to rivals. Kiwi international back rower Briton Nikota is currently free to talk to other teams, and he's got the quality to attract a lot of attention in his own right. The Eels have both Bryce Cartwright coming off contract and Ryan Matterson with a player option for 2026. Particularly if Matterson chooses to move elsewhere, it could free up the money for them to have a real play at Nikora. Same with the Knights, who have Adam Elliott, Brodie Jones and Kai Pearce-Paul all without contracts for 2026, and a mutual option for Tyson Frizzell. They could all of a sudden have a heap of money to spend on a back rower. But the option that I'm looking closest at is once again the Warriors. Captain Tohu Harris isn't signed for 2026 and would be 34 coming into that season. The chance to return home to New Zealand and take on a leadership role at the Warriors could be massively attractive for Nikota, especially if the Warriors continue to build positively under Andrew Webster. There are a heap of high quality young forwards in the Shire, so if Nikora does end up being squeezed out, it wouldn't shock me. And next up, we've got another Kiwi who plays for the Sharks in Ronaldo Mulitalo. It feels like Mulitalo has been around forever, but he's only 24 years old. He is such a cult hero in the Shire that I really can't see him moving anywhere, but there would be clubs interested in him. Jack Bostock from the Dolphins is off contract, so if he's tempted to sign elsewhere, it could potentially open up a jersey for Mulitalo to return to Southeast Queensland, where he moved when he was 14. The Bulldogs are another option too, with Jacob Kiraz and Stephen Crichton the only two outside backs locked up long term. But as I say, I think Mulitalo would find it very hard to leave the Sharks. And lastly, for Cronulla, fullback Will Kennedy. I do rate Kennedy as a very solid fullback for a club who's looking to play finals footy and potentially push into the top 4, but the Sharks are now a club who've developed beyond that. Cade Dykes is a very highly rated young fullback in their system who they do have signed for 2025 despite a troubled injury history. If they put their faith in Dykes, letting Kennedy go in order to save cap space, then it would make sense. As for where Kennedy then goes, it's kind of hard to see a destination. The Raiders have chopped and changed their fullback a heap in recent years, but Kyle Wheat seems to do pretty well in that position, and they've got young Chevy Stewart in their system as well. Parramatta are another club with a bit of a question mark over their fullback jersey, but they wouldn't have let go of Clint Gutherson just to sign Will Kennedy. He might honestly just end up being one of those players who we all think has very high quality, but has to sign for a club in the Super League, and we sit there and think, how did that happen? A player though who'll be 33 coming into that season is Roosters captain James Tedesco. Now I want to be clear, if Tedesco continues to play in the NRL, it won't be anywhere but the Roosters. What few Roosters fans there are would be rioting if they didn't let their captain finish his career in Bondi. But 33 is a big age for a player who's put his body through the physicality that Tedesco has. He was almost a Dally M winner this season, so is obviously still capable of a very high level of output. But he has already achieved pretty much everything there is to do in this game. He's captained his state to an Origin win. He's captained his country to a World Cup win. He's won back-to-back premierships with his club. The only thing potentially left for him to do is to captain the Roosters to a premiership. But whether the hunger to do that is enough to keep the veteran in the game remains to be seen. And that leads me straight into a potential transfer that I predicted about a year ago. As soon as young Samoan fullback Suafa Alongo signed a 5-year deal for the Storm, I felt that was the end for Ryan Papenhuyzen. The end of his time at the Storm. I kind of made that sound like he was going to be killed. Anyway, it prompted me to look at Papenhuyzen's contract, and I noticed that it expired at the same time as a 33-year-old James Tedesco. That got the cogs whirring. The big thing standing in the way though for the Roosters is that if Tedesco does decide to retire, it's not a decision he's going to be making very soon. So they're probably going to lose out to other interested clubs who are able to talk to Papenhuyzen now. One thing's for sure though, the Storm seem to have decided that he's the unlucky man to be forced out due to the salary cap constraints. And despite his injury history, I don't expect him to struggle to find a club by any means. He's a Clive Churchill medalist and a premiership winner. Parramatta, if you wanted X Factor for your fullback position, there's a local junior out there who is looking for a club. I see this being a very big news story between now and the start of the season. So those are the biggest names currently able to talk to rival clubs as of today. There are a heap of other names who've become available who probably deserve a mention, but I do expect a lot of them to just remain with their current clubs. Let me know though your bold prediction as to where one of these players might end up in the comments below. Most baseless and outlandish prediction wins Dally M News Corp Journalist of the Year. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to hit the like button and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.